Oh. All right, we're on. Hi, I'm Kevin Alcuni, the adult librarian in the Exploration and Creativity Department of the Los Angeles Public Library. And I'm here today to introduce today's amazing LA May program, a conversation between Hanif Abdurraqib and Courtney Lilly. First, we want to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities, our Library Foundation, and our behind-the-scenes staff for helping bring the LA May programs to you virtually, especially today on a Saturday morning. LA May focuses on the diverse landscape of Los Angeles, highlighting the immense artistic and performance talent that has developed in the course of the city's eclectic history. If you'd like to see more of our amazing programs, please visit our online calendar at lapl.org/events. And for our LA May programs, specifically visit lapl.org/LAMade. Our website also has blog posts that highlights the library's diverse resources and upcoming programs. Now, before I bring out today's speakers, I want to remind everyone that you'll have a chance to win a free copy of Hanif's new book, A Little Devil in America, by emailing the EC department at lapl.org. And we'll have a little ticker running down to just remind everybody. And now for the main event. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His book, Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest, was a New York Times bestseller and a National Book Critic Circle finalist. His latest book is called A Little Devil in America. He'll be in conversation with Courtney Lilly, showrunner of both Blackish, now in its 7th season, as well as the spin-off Mixed-ish, currently in its 2nd season. He's been nominated for 3 Emmys for Outstanding Comedy and has won 4 NAACP Image Awards for Best Comedy Series for Blackish. Please welcome Hanif and Courtney. Yay! Now, Hanif's going to start us off with a brief reading, followed up by the conversation, and lastly, listener questions. So take it away, Hanif.
Hey, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to read from something new. I'm going to read, my screen is here. I was going to read out off my tablet, but it's not going to charge in time, so I apologize. I have a book that is in the works about Ohio and basketball and LeBron James and basketball movies. And so I'm going to read a small thing about He Got Game. And I don't know where to start. I'm going to start and drop us into the last scene of He Got Game so that I'm not really reading for super long. In the like end of the last scene of He Got Game too. So this is from a forthcoming book that no one's really ever heard me read out of, so, but it felt appropriate to read today. I was thinking about basketball and thinking about basketball movies. So this is a moment where you're made to feel like Jake could win the game, could win the freedom being dangled before him, freedom that it barely feels like he's playing for anyway. By this point, it is made to seem clear that the disdain Jesus has for Jake wouldn't allow Jesus to attend Big State even if he wanted to. We are made to understand that the game between the two has different stakes than it did when it began. What Jake seems to be playing for is respect, something that is so often denied to the father who returns, even a father with as ill of a history to answer for as Jake, but still there is Jake playing to show his son that he's not yet dead, not yet willing to be vanished into a hole and forgotten, to say, son, I named you for a heaven-sent hooper, and that's where I learned my game from. This is the moment, with Jake shouting over the horns and strings of the film's score, that you feel like some Holy Spirit might guide the father's conquering of the son just this one time. Jake hits a fadeaway off the glass and shouts, I feel refreshed. Jesus, for a moment, looks bewildered, perhaps slightly proud, but the pride only hangs for a brief moment before it is washed away by renewed anger. And just like that, you know if Jake is to miss again, the game is likely over. And when he does, it is. Jake can barely guard his son, who waltzes by him for an easy dunk. And out of breath, Jake backs off Jesus, who hits the bottom of the net from the top of the key. Even when Jake gets the ball back and banks in an exhausted long jumper through heavy breaths, you are to understand what is coming, punctuated by Jesus telling him, that's your last basket, with prophetic clarity. And beyond that clarity, there's nothing left. Jake spits out blood from his mouth that arrived there after the arrival of his son's elbow. Jake stops challenging shots altogether. It's 7-5, and then it's 8-5, and then it's 9-5. Jake tells Jesus that he has to earn the last 2 points, but he's weak, heaving shallow breaths and leaning on his son to stay upright. And there's an awareness that sets in here, that Jake is going back to jail, that he's no longer in control, that his son is not interested in mercy. On the final point, Jake is shoved to the ground. Jesus dunks and firmly places the ball on his father's heaving stomach, and then taunts his father, who struggles to get up, while bystanders point and laugh. There is a volta, we are to believe, when Jake stands up to his son and offers final advice, telling him to get the hatred out of his heart, before Jake vanishes into the backseat of a car and heads back to prison. But I would like to suggest an ending to the film in the moments right before. The moment of Jake struggling while Jesus taunts. The idea that is presented is one of conquering the father, not only as a nuisance, but also a haunting, a memory of that which could have been but was stolen by violence. And yes, this small degree doesn't undo that violence, as Jake suggests in his ending monologue, but it is Jesus clearly that there is a power that can no longer be wrested from him. If the trope of the jailed father returning home must exist, let it fully lean into this, perhaps. Sons exercising all the sins of the father that live within. Sure, at the end of He Got Game, we are to believe that there is some reconciliation of sorts. We see Jesus at big stake after all. Jake remains in prison as Jesus attending college is not proven to have happened by direct result of Jake's influence. And the film ends with Jake throwing a basketball over a prison wall, only for it to land at Jesus' feet in the big state gym. And this is fine, I suppose, corny, as too many movies wrestling with these large dynamics tend to be. If I cannot get the victory I was rooting for, then I would prefer an exorcism, an addiction. A son shedding his father one last time and becoming untouchable. And for anyone who grew up in a home where there was a belt unleashed from the rings on a parent's pants, or where there might have been a switch pulled down from a tree, you know that some punishments can have an expiration date. Some of us grow too large or too accustomed to every kind of pain for our parents to physically punish us in the same way. When I started getting into enough fights with the kids on my block, and when I started losing enough fights with kids on my block, my body began to hold an understanding of pain differently. If your child comes home with a split lip or someone else's blood on their shirt, a parent might rearrange their relationship with physicality. And what I'm talking about mostly is fear and how it operated on a sliding scale for me in the household where I grew up. I don't remember when I stopped being afraid of my father, and I don't remember when he became aware that I was no longer afraid of him. After my mother died, it was just my pops raising us, and he was present, rarely distant, and so our resentments grew over time, slow and irrational. There's no good math to track when this happens. It doesn't happen in one day or in one argument or in one withdrawal. It happens gradually. A curfew is missed and then shrugged off. Eyes are rolled during a lecture, and yes, the threat of physical punishment barely sparks a reaction. And I think this is why the image of sons taking their fathers on in basketball endures so much for me. You can't beat the man until you can, and then, in beating him, something new is revealed. And this isn't only fictional. In Hoop Dreams, when Arthur Agee's father comes back to the family after being strung out on the street for months, and his son plays him in one-on-one, like the old days, growing angrier and more intense with each basket until he finishes his pops off, sending the old man packing, walking into the smoke-filled twilight towards the dealers and the hustlers. What I'm also saying is that there's an absence in my father never being good enough at basketball for me to feel like beating him was some kind of achievement. That there was no way for me to take advantage of whatever power my youth might have held while still a teenager, living under his roof and underneath our shared complications, many of them exacerbated by that foolish youth. And perhaps my father knew this, that if he took to the court in any serious way, I might be there, waiting, eager to prove myself, to beat him in the only way I knew I could. Thanks, y'all.
Man, thank you. That was fantastic, dude. That was great. That was great. It's funny to me, man. It's like one of the things, a lot of my favorite writers, like, you know, Paul Beatty and Deborah Levy, are poets too. And there's something I almost think that's unfair about poets writing prose in a lot of ways, because the efficiency and the economy of word to emotion is so, it's like a skill. It's like if you're playing a video game and you're the guy who's got like the weapon that nobody can stop. And there's something about poets to me that, like, when they jump into other games, like we're talking about prose and not a lot of novels and literature, it's just like something really, really, really pops. And I felt that, man. It's just like, even as I was sitting there listening to you, I was like, okay, well, we can talk about this. I'm going to jump off about this. You know, I saw your post on Instagram about Ben Simmons today. We can talk about this. And at the end, I'm just like, man, it's just talking about fathers and sons. You laid that bare. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And and I feel like when I look at your Instagram, I look at your Twitter, I read your work, I feel like I get a sense of process with you, like seeing your brain work. It's the best part of like reading sometimes, is seeing how somebody else thinks and finding those things line up. Is that something that you kind of work through as you're kind of going, like you take a subject matter, you're watching He Got Game, you're like, okay, how do I make these connections? It's like getting a peek inside your brain, you know?
Well, I think the connections kind of come to me. You know, He Got Game was always to me a typical kind of film about fathers and sons, and the complications that exist between fathers and the resentments that grow between fathers and sons. In what I wrote, I genuinely mean, I wish He Got Game ended in a way that honored the reality of those long-standing complications and didn't try to make them neat and clean, especially because I actually think Spike Lee is very good at endings. I think he's very good at honoring, like leaving and exiting a film and honoring, you know, and to do the right thing. There's no real solution that unfolds. It's just kind of like, this is what happened, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm actually very, you know, and I do love He Got Game, but I'm always very surprised by the choice in ending, because it seems to me that there's a real opportunity to do what I've seen Spike Lee do many times before, and exit a film without offering answers and just letting the complications of the thickness of the complications hanging there. But He Got Game, you know, these kind of things come to me because I'm always interested in what propels a piece of work, be it especially a film. I'm not a film critic by nature at all, but I think I'm pretty observant. Yeah. And I'm always trying to ask myself the question of, what is the emotional current that is making this interesting to me, or that might make it interesting to anyone who is not me? When I'm watching sports, you know, like what emotional complications exist, or what I'm a big on narrative. I love narratives in sports. And that's what kind of brings me back.
Well, it's so funny. It's like, again, I'm from the suburban Philadelphia, and Ben Simmons to me is a fascinating character. Like, it breaks my heart that Philadelphia is going to hate this guy, because he's a unicorn. He's a basketball player who's a #1 pick who doesn't like to shoot. I mean, like, if you made that up into a book or a movie, it's absurd. And here we are with this individual. And so, like, it's the same thing, I think, that draws people to sports. It's like, that's why we like those movies, are underdog stories and so on and so forth. And I think, you know, it's like, and some of the things about your writing specifically, and the way you were able to pull things together and make connections, like, I haven't seen He Got Game in a million years. And now I'm like, oh, I gotta go see that. You know, like, even like with that context of just that last scene. And that's like some of the stuff, like, off of, you know, the best kind, like you said, I'm not a film critic. I'm like, well, that's the best kind of film criticism, to see a movie in a different way, to think about it and to get some perspective. And that's just dope, man, you know? Yeah.
The thing, you know, and to jump back to Ben, you know, the thing that is heartbreaking about Ben Simmons, you know, I'm someone who, like, lived through the era of, like, Nick Anderson. The thing happened. And in retrospect, Nick Anderson was never a great free throw shooter, but definitely, like, he struggled after he missed those in the playoffs. And to see, I think jokes are jokes, and Ben Simmons is who he is to some degree, but to see the thing in Game 7 where he passed up the open dunk was kind of jarring for me. I was like, this is not, like, there's not wanting to shoot, and then there's like an actual mental block that is when a player loses confidence, and when a player knows a team and his teammates have lost confidence in him. That's what's happening, I think. And I don't think it's gonna, for me, how you feel as a Sixers person or whatever, but I just don't think it's gonna work in Philly. I just don't think it can work for him. I don't think it will. And it's like, again, it's like watching sports as narrative, like you would watch a movie or read a book, and you're seeing inside somebody's head. I texted my brother immediately, Ben Simmons' house is on the market, as soon as he made that pass. Because it got to be. It's in his head. It's just like that thing that, you know, and he's a quiet person, generally speaking, anyway. He's a little mysterious, and you character of Team, especially, like, you know, like
Philadelphia, character of team and character of city needs to kind of align in a way. And like, he's not going to work there. You know, there's going to be no reclamation projects that's going to make it make sense in a way. And it's tragic. It's really tragic.
I mean, a team, you know, the difference between Ben Simmons and someone like Trae Young, you know, Trae Young's not a great, efficient shooter, but the team believes in him. This team has confidence in him. This team's saying, well, go out there and keep shooting. You know, as someone who grew up playing basketball and someone who's an immensely who's always been an immensely streaky shooter, there are times when your team and your coaches tell you keep shooting, but you can tell they don't really mean it. You know what I mean? You can tell they're trying to pump you up, but they're kind of like, but maybe pass up a couple shots if you can. You can tell them Trae Young, they're like, you got to keep shooting because you're going to shoot us to, or I mean, in the case of last night, you know, you're going to shoot us to a 40-point loss, but that you're our guy.
Yep.
And I think what's happening with Ben Simmons and Philly is that they just knew they couldn't have him on the floor in the fourth quarter. And what does it do for an all-star's internal machinery? An all-star, if you're saying, if your team is saying, we cannot play you during high-pressure moments, that's just like unfathomable.
Yep. And it just built to a singular moment in a way that I haven't seen a lot of things go to, you know, like it's like, you know, again, bringing it back to he got game and these things. This was a moment of like, you know, where you could see it as an individual that like this was going to never be the same, that this was going to be the thing that you were going to be known for, you know, which is always like an interesting thing. I think of when I, you know, writing in television and stuff like that, it's like, there's a tragedy in like people always kind of being known for their lowest moments in a way. You know, that's the American psyche. It's just like you could do X, Y, and Z for forever. And then it becomes this thing that like you can't shake. And like that's notoriety. And now you saw it happen. You saw him be branded in a way that's going to be just like, you know, like he doesn't want it, coward, all those other kind of things. You hear that. And he's 24 years old. What is it?
Really young.
It's insane.
Really young. Really young and also absolutely elite at certain things, you know?
Yes.
Like if he's anchoring it in any other team, if he's leading your defense, that's a great leader of a defense. And I don't know. I believe that he has a lot of future left and he'll be great. I just don't think it's gonna happen in Philadelphia.
It's not. And honestly, as fans, it's like me partly is like, we don't really deserve it, you know, but I also know that like we're hard on our teams and the booing is for a reason. And that's just, you know, you are where you are in the moment that you're in, you know? So like, that's kind of like, it's just not going to work. You know, it's so fascinating. And when you see these kind of things, like to me, you know, again, you know, I see something like that and it inspires things in me. And I sit there and I think of music. I think of like literature. And like for you, you know, just asking a booky kind of question, like when did you start putting all these things, these likes that you have together as a writer? You know, whether it was hip hop early on, like the synthesis, whether there were people you were reading that was kind of just like, oh, this is dope. This is the kind of thing. Because I like even again when I read your stuff, I'm like, oh, this is how I talk to my friends about the world, of all those connections, you know, and this is how it makes sense that like, you know, I see the Wire album back there, you know, I'm like, yes, this, which is this, it's all in your brain at once, you know, and before internet, it was a different kind of thing, but now obviously we can all see and share and do all those kind of things in a like-minded way, but it's very, I think the skill obviously you have is to make those connections clear and do an emotional kind of touchstone to it. But like, when did you start figuring out, you know, if you're a rapper, when did you get to start figuring out your flow, you know, that kind of thing?
That's a great question. I mean, as I said, I wrote prose first. I was a music critic before I was anything. And part of that is, it's interesting because it was interesting to hear you say that like the writing feels like the way you talk to your friends, because that's how I came to this. I wanted to, more than anything, when I was of a college age, I wanted to be the DJ for a college radio station, because I came up in the golden era of college radio, you know, and I was born in, raised and still live in, I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I live in a college town in the really 90s boom of college radio, where there were kind of no rules or borders around genre, you know, the college radio shows I would listen to, mostly black DJs who would just play anything. I would get Alice in Chains next to Fugees, for early Fugees records, or, you know, Melissa Etheridge next to Das Effects or Onyx, you know? And that is what I wanted. But at the time I kind of was in college or of college age, that college radio vibe had kind of faded, you know, a little bit at least. I think impacted perhaps at the dawn of Napster and LimeWire and all that. But I still took to conversations about music like a DJ. I want to talk to my friends about everything. I want to play samples for everyone. I want to talk about the history of sounds, all of this type stuff.
Yeah.
And then I kind of was on the punk scene coming up here. And the thing about the punk scenes in the Midwestern in the early 2000s, there was a real, there was a real boom. And a lot of the ways those scenes stayed interconnected was through zines.
Yep.
The thing with zines, though, is that like everybody wants one, but no one really wants to write in them. You know, no one really wants to write in the shit at the time, at least. Now they're having a revival, which is beautiful to me. But I wrote in zines, and I thought of myself as a reporter, reporting on the circumstances of the scene I was on and the music that was coming out of the scene I was on. And it felt like I was just talking to my friends.
Yeah.
Because I was, in a way, you know, I was sending the zine out, and it would sometimes end up on other scenes, and I would go to those scenes and see people who I knew and hung out with. You know, at that point in my punk, hardcore pop punk scene experience, Columbus wasn't really a hub. There was stuff happening here, but you'd have to go to Dayton or Pittsburgh or Detroit or especially Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, especially Chicago at that time. If you didn't have the gas money for Chicago, but you can get to Detroit, you did Detroit or Pittsburgh. But if you had a little bit of gas money, you go to Dayton and something good. And so in a way, I thought of myself as a reporter kind of mapping out sounds and experiences and bringing those experiences to life for those who couldn't see them, to paint them in a way where it felt like they could see them.
It's interesting because you're touching on another thing that I've been thinking a lot about. And, you know, I'm in my mid 40s, and, you know, I remember, and like my first job, you talk about being a reporter, my first job was at a newspaper in Rhode Island, the Providence Journal, you know, which is Providence and Rhode Island, very provincial. It's a tiny little state that has its own little inferiority complexes, all these other kind of things, but it's fascinating. It's wildly fascinating. But Providence and Rhode Island are Providence and Rhode Island. It's not Connecticut. It's not Boston. It's not Massachusetts. And when you talk, and you know, and the world used to kind of be that way a little bit, you know, like where, you know, we've obviously people have talked about our hip hop, you know, the difference between like LA and the East Coast, and the way there was regionalism to art and stuff. And it's been fascinating to me. I think the internet has flattened a lot of that in a way. So like now it's like, oh, we're a band in Austin, but because of SoundCloud or whatever the thing is, we're a band everywhere. Right. And when you talk about like Columbus, staying in Columbus and doing a zine, it reminds me of a way, and maybe I'm just being nostalgic in my middle age, of because like regions were incubators, because you weren't trying to like pop off, and there wasn't an ability really to do it, that you could really get a sound and a style, and that there could be like-minded individuals in a small place, that like the Athens sound of the early 80s, you know, it's just like it happened in a college town that was not the scene, like where people could go see a band Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever nights, and they could play over and over again and develop. And after asking you that question, you're talking about being in Columbus and how you had to stretch out to do all these other kind of things, and you're getting your sense together, you're writing the zines. Is there any kind of sense that like being, you know, born, raised in Columbus, that there's something in Columbus being a college town, you not moving to Chicago, you not doing those things, that like feels like helped you get your kind of specific voice in a way that you feel like attuned to in that way?
I think so. And I also will say real quick that I lived in Connecticut for 2.5 years and did not enjoy it. Yeah. Spent a lot of time in Providence, because Providence reminds me so much of Columbus. Yeah. Still now so much. It reminds me of Columbus. I loved being in Providence. And when I moved out of Connecticut, I could have lived anywhere. And I had a real moment, a real strong flirtation with Providence. But then it was kind of like, why live in a place that reminds you of Columbus when you just move back to Columbus kind of thing. Gosh, I love Providence. I think perhaps living here, but also coming up in the time I came up in, and coming up with the familial structure I did. I'm the youngest of 4, right? And I have 2 sets of, you know, I feel like my siblings were born in like pairs, where my 2 older, I have a brother who's very close to my age, but 2 older siblings who are much older than me. You know, like 8 to 10 years older than me. And that meant that they were in college and high school when I was forming my musical sounds.
Yep.
And they were like light years ahead. And this was in an era where like UMTV Raps would come on, and then after UMTV Raps, Headbangers Ball would come on MTV. And we would just watch both. I remember staying up. My brother would record both on VHS tapes, and we'd watch them, you know. And I learned and understood like what to listen for and what to get excited about and how to articulate that excitement. Because I think they were like exposed. You know, my sister went to Ohio State. My brother was at UC at a time when Cincinnati was kind of like a hip hop hub for the Midwest briefly. I mean, High Tech was there, and you know, Black Star was coming down there to work with High Tech, and Jay Rawls got his start there. And it created this thing where there was just always, and my brother and sister would open me up to these experiences by taking me to shows or putting albums in my hand. And I also just grew up in an environment with curious listeners on the school bus. People were listening to all kinds of stuff. We were kind of exchanging tapes and all that. And I think that built a language for me early on. And more importantly, it divorced me of any kind of idea around guilty pleasure. Yeah. Because I could always find someone excited about something I was excited about. Yeah. There was no point, there's no shame or no point in hiding anything I was listening to, because everyone wanted to hear something. Even like, you know, I'm a big pop fan. I mean, I'm wearing a fucking like Lisa and Cult Jam shirt. You know, like I'm a pop music disciple in a lot of ways. And I just did not grow up around people who were ashamed to love pop music. Yeah. You know, like big pop music. My mom loved Whitney Houston. Oh, yeah. You know, like I grew up in the boy band era, and some of the cats who I was like, you know, some of the hip hop heads and some of the like industrial, I remember so many of the like goth industrial music folks who I was in high school with were also rocking with NSYNC a little bit. Wow. Because I just, you know, I say like growing up, stripping away these ideas of like shame around what is being loved and cared for was so important for me in finding my voice.
When do you think it, like, and again, do you think a lot of it was because of the having older siblings? Was it like something, and it's such a great answer to me. Was it a process, or was it kind of like, you know, you're a fish in water and it's just like, oh, there's no shame around it. I'm kind of realizing it once I've done that it was this thing that helped me be the kind of writer I am. Or did you have to kind of go on a journey to do that?
No, I think it was a fish and water thing. I mean, I also think that like the exuberance I had around music, because I was the youngest, you know, like I did have to keep some of that inside. No one really wanted to listen to me wax poetic about the shit I love. I feel like when you're the youngest of four in a family, you sometimes get very little stage time for your excitement. So I did spend a lot of time isolated listening to music and recording songs off the radio and learning how to do pause tapes. But through that isolation, my imagination really got to expand and play.
Yeah. It's funny, there's a filmmaker, Peter Greenaway, he talked about being part of the reason he became a filmmaker is because he would have been a painter, but paintings don't have music, you know? And so that was a real thing. And it's allowed me to contextualize kind of how I am, because I'm a big music fan and so on and so forth. And there's things I can't play a note of anything, can't sing, just love listening and stuff like that. And I often think of my job in television as in the frame, you know, contextualized through other arts. Sometimes I sit there and I'm like, well, you know what? I'm just like, I can be Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis's band. That's like your own sense of things. You don't always have to be the man. You learn to play with some people and those things, and analogies about how I am as a writer, how I am as a reader, how I am as a viewer. Are there other places in art where you could kind of do similar kind of things? Is that how you think? I mean, again, there's such an overlap of art and world and stuff like that in your, you know.
That's such a great, the Hancock and Davis's band is such a great thing, because I often think about that, about, you know, Coltrane, for his great, obviously Train is a singular player, but I actually think he's even better band leader because he just knew what to sacrifice of himself for the greater good of the sound, right? And you get some folks who can do that. You got a lot of players who could do that, right? Hancock, one of them. And then you get the players who I also love. I think about Mingus, who are so like averse sometimes to the. Have you ever heard the album Money Jungle, the
No.
Ellington Mingus Roach album? And
No.
the stories of that, about how Mingus was just like like fighting with Max Roach all of the time, and Duke Ellington tells these stories about how he was just like holding that recording together with Scotch tape essentially, because Mingus was like quitting every other hour, you know. And Max Roach was like, well, you know, I don't know, but I think about Mingus, particularly in the Money Jungle album, all the time. It's like, well, I don't want to be that as much. I mean, and I love Mingus, I don't want to be the person you drop into a scenario. You know, I don't want to be a dismantler of my own chorus of interests and excitements.
Right.
And instead, I like being guided by them. I like getting out of the way of them and letting them take me where they want to take me, which I do think. I mean, you get that with Hancock, with Train, with these folks who fold into bands in ways where you don't even know they're there until you do. Right? Yeah. That's what I think pushes me more. When people are like, well, how do you know when to insert yourself in the personal into your writing? It's because I'm so guided. I'm just not guided by my own investments, my own personal investments. I am guided by the curiosities, the pathways of curiosities that open up to me when I pursue my own excitements. And then every now and then on those pathways, I know when to get on I know when to get on my horn. I know when to get my solo on, right? I know when to say, okay, now there's an avenue for me to get in here and then get out of the way. And so I love that analogy, especially with Hancock, who is perhaps one of the most malleable, you know, players.
Well, and jumping off of that, how, and like, this is often something I feel I struggle with as a writer, is like, and it's an unfair paradigm, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. How technical do you think your writing is versus how emotional? Where do you get into those kind of places where you sit there? Like, to me, there's a lot of that's intuitive, you know, about a writer and emotionally. And I sit there and I think about experience, and I think probably incorrectly, I think about all the emotional work I've done that's outside of the academy, outside of formal education, outside of structure, to be able to hear and listen to other people, bring stories to light, understand emotion. And at the same time, I'm a technician too, you know, and I think I'm more emotionally attuned and intuitive than technical. I think these things obviously get racialized, all these other kind of things. I love talking to other people about their process and as writers and how they view themselves, because I think I probably wear both shoes at different times, and I'll probably stand on one more than the other. But I think it's just, there's obviously, when you talked about where to insert yourself, there's a time to insert yourself, and you're setting something up and you're like, I know I'm going to do it here. But then sometimes it just comes out of you and you don't know. And I'd love to talk about the balance that you feel sometimes as a creative person with these kind of issues.
Well, I have no technical skill, really. If I do, it's not learned in any way. I've never studied writing in any capacity. You know, I wasn't very good at school, and when I was in school, I was not studying writing-based things. I knew I loved reading. I love reading, and I still love reading. I know what I know what I love in the texts of others, but so much of my writing journey has been, you know, failing to be Toni Morrison, or failing to be Lester Bangs, or failing to be the poet Khadijah Queen, right? Like, these failures bring me closer to a voice that is my own. Happy failures too. I mean, these are the people I love, the people I studied, the writers who I want to be like. You know, in some ways failing to be Virginia Hamilton, the great Virginia Hamilton, in terms of expansiveness of imagination. And so because of that, I think my writing is all emotionally driven, because I think the admiration that leads to the desire for imitation is emotional. That comes from, for me, that has an emotional center. And oftentimes I'm stumbling my way towards, it's like, you know, the best freestylers who are really freestyling. And I mean this, if you look at like old 90s clips, we just lost the great Gift of Gab yesterday. If you look at his clips, you look at these great freestylers who you can tell they're in the zone, not when they're like honed in on the mic and all that, but when they're looking around, right? the freestyles I love, where people are really, really off the top. You could tell them. You can tell when they're in a zone, when they're looking around a room, because they're just saying, "Okay, what's the next doorway I can open?" They're not thinking about the present line. They've already mapped that out. They're thinking, "What in this room is going to guide me to the next line?"
Yep.
That is also an emotional experience, right? That's an intuitiveness, and that's kind of what I write with. You know, I'm stumbling towards. It's all about architecture in a way. I'm stumbling towards building a house, but I'm always searching for the next tool, the next doorway to build. And then when I get into that room, I'm like, okay, well, how do I get out of here?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And it's like, again, bringing it back full circle a little bit. It's a little bit like playing basketball. It's a little bit like, you have your things, you have your style, you have your things you're strong at, but like, you're always going to be faced with, and I know you're a soccer fan too, you're always going to be faced with a new situation. As much as you train, as much as you get into this thing. And then going back to Ray Allen, it was fascinating when you were reading from your new work, I was sitting there thinking about it. It's like, oh man, like Jesus Shuttlesworth, Ray Allen's playing Jesus Shuttlesworth in this movie. And then Ray Allen, you're talking about this game. And then Ray Allen's also the guy who practiced getting up off his back and to be able to make shots at the last second. All these things that go into it. Some things are unseen. Some things are different levels of things. And it's just like, but the moments, and like for somebody like Ray Allen, at least from what I've read about him, like that rehearsal and that structure is so natural to him, that like, of course this opportunity is going to come up. But when I, again, obviously not a professional basketball player and very novice, some of the best moments for me are all improvisation. When you sit there, there's a moment I talk about with a friend of mine where, we're just inbounds in the ball, and it's like it's playing a full court game, but it's the half court inbound, kind of top of the key, and I realized that my defender, that I could do is spin on him and get to the basket, as long as you don't say anything, right? And I've been playing basketball with this guy for 15 years, and I just walked him up to the top of the key to the elbow just enough, and I did my spin, and he threw the ball. We didn't have to look at each other. We didn't have to say anything to each other, and to me, that was a moment of synchronicity and just kind of like, it's like some of the best stuff in the world, and it wasn't, I didn't dunk it. We didn't win the game. There was no prize. It was just like, he's thinking exactly the way I am right now. And he sees it and it happens. And that's, but that's improvisation, that's not like we drew it up. And there's like so many different ways to be in that kind of stuff,
And I love that. And I always think about improvisation, especially in basketball, because one also has to account for when some shit doesn't work. If you like watch, I write about this in an earlier book, but I love watching the clip of Allen Iverson crossing Michael Jordan over. Yeah. Right. Because that is, if you want to talk about technical, that is technical. Because what Allen Iverson is doing, he hits him with that little crossover first, just to figure out what might work. You know what I mean? Like just to see, can I get him a little bit off balance? And if he falls for this, then I know what I can do next.
Yep.
Right. It's that thing. It's looking around the room and seeing what's going to get you to the next doorway. And I know what people remember is the big crossover, but actually what's more fascinating to me is the little crossover, because it is almost like he was editing himself in real time. He was using what he was presented with to edit. In the minute he saw Michael Jordan bite on a little crossover, he could have gone right past him then. Could have done it then. But he was looking for something greater.
Yeah. And I love that moment too, because it's one of those things, going back to Philadelphia, Ben Simmons, all that kind of stuff. You saw the challenge getting ready to happen. Like Mike got down in his defensive position. He's like, all right, come on, son. Like he was ready to do this. And he's like, I don't know who this kid is, but we're going to do that, And it was, and again, like, and seeing that little rock from Allen and then boom, and getting and pulling up and hitting the jump. It's the whole thing is, it's beauty. It's a moment. It's everybody without scripting it, knowing something's happening. People are knowing something's happening, and that's just, that's why I watch sports. That's why I participate in art and all that other kind of stuff to capture feelings and stuff like that. It's amazing.
The way I think about writing, to further basketball analogy, like there are people who are scorers and then there are people who are shot makers. And I don't think those two always align. Yeah. Right. Like prime Lou Williams for example, is like a good scorer, sure, but never going to lead the league in scoring. But he's one of the best shot makers you could have on your team because the degree of difficulty which he improvises through.
Yep.
A little less so now, he's a little older, but I kind of grew up admiring players who were tough shot makers.
Yep.
Reggie Miller, tough shot maker, and really tough shot maker.
Yeah.
If you look at what he had to do to get his shots and then get them off, or point guards who would get beat up. I mean, Iverson, tough shot maker. Yeah, and that is in a way the kind of thing that I love most about writing. If I could compare myself to, not ever going to score a bunch, but I think I can make some tough shots. I think I can improvise my way to some things that I can see something that wasn't there before.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's like, it is like, and like being able to process, and that's some of the things I think about. What's so great about your writing is like, we talk about the tough shots. You're making connections that aren't always there, aren't always easy, and aren't always comfortable for people either, to get us to a place emotionally where we see things a little differently, a little deeper. And that's just like the best form of criticism you could go to, the best form of criticism you could go to. Yeah. Man, I'm gonna go through one more quick question before I'm sure we have the Q&A coming up. So you also, and again, obviously because of the pandemic, haven't been able to do that much. I'm curious, because you're a traveler, you're always touring with your books, all that kind of stuff. You get to see people as readers and how they engage. Obviously, people are reading in tons of different ways, the internet, so on and so forth, than probably when we were coming up. I would love to get your thoughts a little bit about particularly younger readers, people as readers now. What's the audience like? Because you actually, and again, when I saw this on Instagram, I think you're talking about how you missed being able to be in an audience with people and talk about where they are and go to these kind of places. And as a poet and as a writer, obviously words are so important, and we're seeing them in so many different ways than like we were 15, 20 years ago. There's all these thoughts about how we're disengaged from novels and this and so on and so forth. But I feel like you're actually out there on the front lines like a reporter, talking to people who have an engagement in that kind of way. Is there anything to like say about that? Think about,
Yeah. I mean, I it's funny because I didn't think I would miss it. When my book came out, my first instinct was like, I get to release a book from my house. I could everything's virtual. And I will admit the first couple of things, I was like, this is nice. Like I could do a thing virtually. My couch is right there. My kitchen's right there. It was a far cry from in 2019, between 2019 and 2020, I did maybe 152 or so readings.
Oh, wow.
So I was traveling all of the time, planes, hotels. And the thing about it is I can take or leave the actual reading portion. Now I try to bring my best self to every reading I do. But what excites me the most is just hearing from people, even if it's not about my book. I want to hear about the scenes that people are on, the punk scenes people are on. People just come up to me and be like, tell me stories about shows that they saw that sometimes people are like, I think we're at the same show, and tell me a story of a show that we were at together, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I started writing about music particularly because I felt in some ways alone in my exuberance and wanting to talk about music with people, and being on the road and being in front of people afforded me that in such a great way. And I realized I missed it. Now, granted, I still do that on Instagram and whatnot, but it's just different, And I like hearing from people about what they're listening to and what they're excited about musically on the internet, obviously. That's always been the case for me. Back in my blog message board days, that was the case for me. But there is something a little different about witnessing someone in person excitedly tell you what they love about an album or what they love about. And so I miss that, And yes, I miss some of the tactile things about reading in front of people, being in a space and kind of hearing the machinery of a bookstore, or both literal machinery and the kind of emotional machinery of a bookstore. I do miss talking to young folks about what's happening in their communities, be it socially, politically, but also from a literary or artistic standpoint. I used to do things where it's if I had a little extra time in a place, I'll pop by a school or pop by a juvenile detention center or pop by an art making space, just to get a sense for what is happening in a place. I don't ever want to be a tourist,
Right.
I don't want to just come to a place, do what I have to do, and then leave.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how people are living in places, and I'm interested in, I can't become a part of a community in a few days, but I'm interested in being a witness to the good of a community, and that feels important. So I do miss that, and people are like, when are you going to get back on road? I booked one in-person thing, but it's not until like April of next year, and even that, I told my agent, like, we'll play it by ear, like. I'm sure it'll be fine. Like, I'm sure it'll be cool, but I was a little tentative to book an in-person thing, and but then it was like, well, April 2022. I feel like I can maybe thumbs that up.
Yeah, yeah. We can at least put it on the calendar for right.
Yeah,
now. At least put it on the calendar. That's amazing. Is there any place that surprised you of all the places you've gone that you're like, or are you pretty good about going in with almost no expectations when you're going to a city or a place?
Well, the wild thing about me is that even before I started touring for books, I had been to, and this is still the case, I've been to 48 of the 50 states. Yeah. I was a big road tripper in my youth, and so I've just been to a lot of places. And so, no, I mean, I always keep an open mind, because I don't know. I come from a place that people find unexpected affection for, and I believe that I can find some unexpected affection for almost anywhere. I mean, I will say that, like, gosh, I said I read in Bozeman, Montana once.
Yeah.
And I did not want to leave.
Yeah.
It's just so beautiful.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Go ahead.
I don't know. I just remember, I like stayed an extra day, if I recall. Like, I did my reading, I hung out for a day and got to know some folks, and I was supposed to leave. And I was like, I think I'm going to stay. I just kind of want to walk around.
Yeah.
So if there's one place that surprised me, I would say it was that. I had been to Montana before, but never Bozeman. And I would love to go back. I don't know. I need to like make a list of places that I would love to go back to, because I can't travel like I did before. I'm like a little older, like taking care of my body a little differently. And I just can't do the wear and tear of like 100+ shows in a year.
Yeah.
But I do want to maybe make a little list of places that are places I would love to return to if they'll have me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So, hey, Kevin, is this time for the Q&A? Is that how this works?
Yeah, we can do it right now. All right. So we have some listener questions here. By the way, great conversation. Super interesting. So fantastic. Anyway, just commenting on that. All right. So here's the first one. It's from Diane, and it's for Hanif. What were some of your favorite nuggets you found in researching for your book?
I love this question. I love talking about this, and I wish I could I don't know. I can't put anything in a chat that people can see, but I wish I could, because, when I normally with Little Devil, I have like a whole slideshow thing and some videos. So first is Ellen Armstrong, first Black woman magician to headline her own show in America. And the way I found out about Ellen Armstrong was just because my brain couldn't stop turning. There was a point a few years ago where the phrase Black girl magic began to get commodified. Yep. And a lot of Black women wrote these great, smart essays on the dangers of that commodification, which, to be clear, the things written about in those essays absolutely came true. I mean, not that I doubted at the time, but I mean, we're seeing it. It's like Black women were like writing in these essays like, we're going to come to a point, if y'all keep fucking around, we're going to come to a point where people are not going to be able to see Black women as human and start wanting to put capes on them and whatnot. And what happened was, you saw happen with Stacey Abrams, where all these white folks were like, let's just give her a Marvel movie. It's like, no. But when I was looking at those essays, this thing was just like rattling in the back of my head, where it's like, I don't want to get too literal here, but who was the first Black woman to do magic in the States? Because to me, that felt like a more interesting track. And I found about John Hartford Armstrong, and then I found out about Ellen Armstrong, and there's not a lot of great history on her on the internet. And so what I was doing was I was cold calling magic historians, which they exist. Wow. And they were so wonderful. I have to give them a shout out. I should have thanked them in the back of the book. I thought about that and I forgot. Because I would call like one in Syracuse, and that one in Syracuse would be like, well, I don't know anything, but you know what my friend in Dallas does. And I'll call that friend, and they would be like, I know very little, but my friend in Seattle knows something big. And I was just on the phone with these magic historians. So Ellen Armstrong's one. And two, I did not know the kind of devastating and horrific history of the Great Depression era dance marathons.
Oh, yeah.
And that actually unlocked the first essay in the book, the Soul Train essay, which was kind of stagnant because I didn't know what I was getting at. And one of my friends, who's a visual artist, was like, I'm working on this exhibit about these Depression era dance marathons. And I was like, you know, he's like, these are, you know, I know you're working on a book about Black performance, and these marathons were largely for poor white folks, like poor white folks engaged in them. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if it's for me. And he was kind of like, but let me send you, he had a folder full of pictures. And he was like, just let me send you these photos. And he sent me these photos from them, and they were like tender and horrifying. And I just couldn't, I fell down this rabbit hole. And through that falling, I unlocked what I needed that essay to be. You know, because the thing about those dance marathons is that the people who entered them together were not always romantic partners. I mean, it was sometimes because there was a science to it, right? It was like, if a woman is choosing a partner, it's like, I need to find a man who's large enough to hold me up, but not so large that I will collapse under the weight of having to hold them up. So sometimes that means you were just like looking for a neighbor's kid.
Yeah.
And there's something wonderful, but awful, both wonderful and awful about that.
Yeah. Wow. All right. This one comes from Jeremy. For Hanif, love the early discussion about He Got Game and the semen hoop dreams between Arthur and his dad.
Yeah.
What are some of your other basketball films you love and why?
I'm actually working on a column for the Paris Review called Notes on Hoops, where I'm like writing essays about basketball films, in part to kind of like, you know, if we're talking about this from a sports analogy, I know I'm working on this book about basketball movies, and these are kind of my warm-up jump shots, you know. So I've written about Love and Basketball, White Men Can't Jump, and Like Mike recently.
Yeah.
And I
Like
think
Mike,
yeah, because I'm a sneaker. I mean, folks who know me a little bit know I'm a big sneakerhead, a big sneaker collector. And one thing I've been getting into recently is getting like originals. And so I recently got this pair of Jordan 1s from 1985, which is my second pair of Jordan. And I don't know if anyone here cares about sneakers, but wildly, I was recently sent this pair of like Nike Tailwinds from 1980 with the like original receipt when they were purchased in 1980. They were purchased like June 21st, 1980, original box, original ad. And it was the first time I had a pair of shoes older than me. Never been worn. They had never been worn. They'd never been laced. I was like, what the fuck? I can't, sorry if we're not allowed to curse. I know it's like a library thing and I curse stuff. But so Like Mike is one. I did not always love Love and Basketball. And here's why. I think the central conflict in Love and Basketball that takes the two apart is so weird that I'm always like, well, this could have just been solved with like a 20-minute conversation. And as someone who's like gone through breakups and later been like, probably gonna solve that with just like a quick talk. I always had this weird resentment for the central coming apart of Sanaa Lathan and Omar Epps in the movie. But as watching it as an adult, I think there's like a real, and I've also been trying to divest from the trope in film of like men and women can't be friends. But I actually think what happens in a movie like Love and Basketball, in a movie like Brown Sugar, it's not, I don't think it's playing into that trope, because what it's actually talking about is like a deep and really foundational affection that comes from like spending a life alongside a person.
Yeah.
And the possibility that exists. It's not some shit like, I met this person, we tried being friends, and oops, we're making out. Like, you know, whatever that like Ashton Kutcher movie is. It's actually like, I don't know. It's bending into this real possibility for affection that exists between two people who have shared like many modes of a life together, which is more interesting to me than anything else. Like, I have friends who I've known since I was like 12 years old, who I love in a way that might be, in a different circumstance, might be transferable into romance.
Right.
And so there's something I really admire about Love and Basketball in that way.
Yeah, that's cool.
But also Blue Chips. I mean, I don't know. I could talk about basketball movies forever, so we should move on. But like, Blue Chips is such a fascinating basketball movie to me too, because you know, like if you hear Shaq and Penny tell it, Blue Chips is where on the set of Blue Chips is when Shaq was like, the Orlando Magic got to draft Penny Hardaway. You know what I mean? He said like he was on the set of Blue Chips, he saw Penny play, and he went back to the Magic, and we're like, you got to draft this dude.
Yeah.
Isn't that where they also had Bobby Knight be the coach of Duke? No. What was the coaching? It was like
there was the coaching in Blue Chips, but it wasn't Bobby Knight. It was I should know this because I just watched it because I'm writing the next essay on Blue Chips, but I forget.
But I remember because I didn't know much about hoops at the time, and I was like, "Is that right?" And then there was no internet, so I just erroneously assumed the wrong thing. So, all right, we'll end on one last question here. It's from Patty. Hanif, what has been your most favorite line or paragraph that you've written from all of your work? Is there one line that you've written that till this moment still stands out for you?
I hope I haven't written it yet. Yeah. I hope I'm still chasing it. And I also, that's a great question. And I think there are writers who are better equipped to answer than I am because I just don't spend a lot of time. I so often want distance from my own work after it's done. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it because I can't. I think I spend so much time immersed in it when I'm working on it. And then it feels like work. It feels like labor to the point where I'm not at a point of admiration. And I don't, perhaps this is unhealthy, but I also just don't know how to get to the point of admiration when it comes to my own work. I'd like to try maybe one day, but I'm so averse to, thinking through my own work through a lens of admiration.
Fair enough. Courtney, do you kind of feel the same way about kind of your own writing?
I mean, I never watch anything that I ever do. Like once I'm out of the editing, I've seen it. I'm like, all right, just come into your house for free. You'll get it. Everybody will see it. For me, because there's like, our writing process is so different. There's a group of people and there's an aspect of performance when you're coming up with stories or jokes or all that kind of stuff. The joy I get, the moments I remember most are a little communal. It's like the story, the basketball thing I told you about with my buddies. It's like, it's really the interaction with the other writers in the room. If you get people whose job it is to be very funny, to laugh at something, that's all I did. My first job, it's all I want to do. There's one writer, I just wanted to get to laugh at something I said. And it was just like that kind of performance and like seeing people. There's a writer who, has been on our show. He worked on Happy Endings. He was one of the people who ran that, Jonathan Groff. He's great. And he's a pro and he worked on Conan, all this kind of stuff. And he comes into our room every now and again and he just like nails a couple things. You're funny. And you're like, oh, that's the standard, that's the thing, the game. And, and it's like, all of a sudden things are a little crisper, a little sharper. And for me, as I get more experience in this business, it's like, that's the kind of energy I want to keep. I want people to sit there and go like, it's almost like there's a legacy we're handing down, and obviously rooms are diversifying and all these other kind of things, but there's a sharpness in a comedy room that is essential. And that's when you're really humming. And that's when you're getting to some of that things like you're talking about, like teams that play well together. Atlanta trusts these people. And I need, and you want that energy because you feel fuller and better because of it. So it's not moments like, hey, there's this joke we did on the screen. Because honestly, too, when you do a joke in the room, the actor's going to change it when they get on the screen, too. All that stuff. Yeah. It's all, you can't expect an outcome. But what you can have is a moment. And you sit there and you're like, bam, that was great. That was great. And you keep kind of going for those hits and hopefully passing on that legacy to other writers who are coming up behind you to keep that culture going.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah. I guess if I can end on one quick story because it made me think of, so in 2016, I wrote for MTV's VMAs. It was wild because it was back when I worked for MTV News, but I was just a columnist, right? Like I was writing one music column every week. And for some reason, MTV was like, do you want to write for our like flagship award show? And I was like, I'm just a music writer column guy, but okay. And when I got there, they were like, cool. And this is that point where like Key and Peele were hosting In Character in a way. And they were like, cool, do you want to like handle drafting the jokes for Key and Peele? And I was like, do y'all understand that? And I had to keep telling them like, do y'all understand that actually what I do is write a music column for the website? that is what I do. And I remember Courtney said the thing about like getting someone to laugh. I remember taking in just like, because and Courtney, I know you know this. I mean, the work is just like writing a bundle full of jokes. and then kind of handing them over. And I remember being in the room. I remember like the producers like, okay, we're going to take these jokes that you wrote and we're going to take them to Key and Peele, and you're going to sit in the room with them and, you know, watch them read through them. And I was like, that sounds like a nightmare for me personally. So that happened, and they did this thing where they were like, you read the jokes out loud. And I was like, well, this is just really bad, but I'll do it.
Yep.
And I remember like getting through the first 5 and no reaction at all. And then I hit the 6th one, which honestly, I don't even remember the joke, but I hit the 6th one. And I feel like this is a time when like Jordan Peele was a little more stoic. He was like going into his transition. He was pivoting a bit. So he was like way more stoic. And I got to the 6th joke and Jordan Peele started to chuckle quietly. And then his laughter grew louder and louder. And then he kind of like hit his chair a little bit, and that made Key start laughing, and they were both laughing. And I was like, I did it. And no, they didn't laugh. To be clear, they didn't laugh at any of the other jokes. And they were like 25, and they didn't laugh at any other ones. But for that one, right, that one joke, I was like, I can be in the room with these people. I mean, clearly I cannot, but you know what I mean? Like you need that like false sense of confidence to keep going. You know what I mean? It's why, to go back to the Hawks, it's why Trae Young keeps shooting those long ass threes he can't really hit, right? Because every now and then he hits one, and he always hits one at the right time. And that's all you need is you got to hit enough to keep you coming back.
Wow. Yeah, for sure. Just like in writing, I guess.
Keep shooting, man. Keep shooting. That's the advice. Keep shooting. Anybody who's out there who wants to write, keep shooting.
Yeah.
I guess we're going to end it there. That was fantastic. Thanks so much, guys. This was really good. I really appreciate it. It was funny and candid. Thank you so much.
This was wonderful. Courtney, thank you for taking the time. And hopefully we'll cross paths again soon.
Absolutely, man. It was a joy. We could do this for hours, literally.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's LA Made program. Remember to check out the library's online calendar at lapl.org/events. Please join the Summer Reading Challenge, which started several weeks ago. Collect points for reading and completing fun, learning-based activities. Go to lapl.org/summer for more information and to register. And don't forget to, and you don't want to miss our LA Made program on Thursday, July 1st at 4 p.m., the California Native Garden Tour. Please join Flor Mota, landscape designer, and Patty Alvarado, adult librarian at the Benjamin Franklin branch, for a garden tour in the Boyle Heights neighborhood in Los Angeles. This garden is drought tolerant, 100% rain watered, and consists of mostly California native plants. It is lush, beautiful, and supports many native pollinators, and will be streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. We truly appreciate all of your support. Thanks so much, and see you next time.